everything else, is kind of a footnote to Frankel. I'll tell you who enjoys this book, if they'll read it, is the young Marines that have been deployed and redeployed to Afghanistan. One of the last slide I show at the Army War College is a slide of the Khyber Pass. I don't know if you've ever seen that. There's not much up there. And the question I ask is, what does a victory look like up here? And if you'll tell me, I'll tell them back in Washington. I have no idea, this is political, excuse me, why we're still in Afghanistan after 18 years. And neither do most of these guys that are keeping redeployed and redeployed and redeployed. We'll go on and past that. Given those four facts that it's really meaningless, we're really alone, what starts then, I think, for all of us when we realize we're here, we don't know what to do, is our hero's journey. Now that varies from playing in the NFL to being a postman to being a therapist to being a critical care doc to being a rifleman in a platoon in Vietnam. What it is, you have to choose, I think, something that means something to you. Hopefully it means something to somebody else too, but I think real true self is ultimately what is deep down within us. This I like, and I put it up for the Army guys at Carlisle. This is from the Gorgias, the Callicles and Sophocles. They're coming in to the square, and Socrates comes over to him and said, Callicles, come talk to us. We're talking about justice. What's justice? And this is Callicles. He said, philosophy is a delightful thing, Socrates, but if you spend more time with it than you should, it's the undoing of mankind. It's not shameful to practice philosophy while you're a boy, but when you still do it after you're grown and older and become a man, things get ridiculous. So such a man, if he's naturally well favored, becomes unmanly and avoids the centers of his life and marketplaces, and instead lives the rest of his life hiding, whispering in the corner with 3 or 4 boys. And Callicles says, Socrates, I don't want to hear about it. He says, I've got a business to run, and all you sophists do is stand in here in the agora and talk about that. And then something happens, I think, that I love the most. Socrates comes over and grabs him by the toga, and he says, come now, Callicles, speak with us. We're engaged here in a matter of some importance. We're talking about how do you live your life. And recovery, and particularly in old age, consists of that, I think. How did I live my life? How am I living it now? And what do I want with the really precious commodity for me is the days I got left. There's not that many. What am I going to do to really maximize those? And drinking keeps you from having to deal with that. That's what's so subtle about it, and it's so pervasive. This is from, I thought, this is the Washington School, and better put a little Freud in here. So, this is from Civilization That's Discontent. So it doesn't get much better than this. Life as we find it is too hard for us. It brings too many pains, disappointments, impossible tasks. We cannot dispense with palliative measures. There are perhaps 3 such measures: powerful deflections which cause us to make light of our misery, substitutive satisfactions which diminish it, and intoxicating substances which make us insensitive to us. Which of the 3 has our culture chosen? The third one. We're the most over-medicated crowd in the world. We love to take a pill for this, and if you find a pill that works, I'll take it. Tell me what it is. This is another one it's just 2 pages later, and this is you get my age and go back and read Freud for the first time and go away with those horrible papers on technique and everything, and get to Civilization and its discontent and Moses and monotheism and those. It's so much richer. We are threatened with suffering from 3 directions, and this is our old age. From our own body, which is doomed to decay and dissolution, and which cannot even do without pain and anxiety as warning signals from the external world, which may rage against us with overwhelming and merciless forces of destruction. And I think the climate folks have really glommed onto this fear and made a lot of money on it, and it's magnificent in its size and attention. And finally, our relationships with other men. Do we get a chance in old age to go back and kind of make amends and get rid of our bitterness, because that's the thing that kills us the most, I think, our hate and resentment. The sad news about substance abuse in old age, less than 20% get referred. And most of those don't come from physicians. You know what they come from? The legal system. Still in the older people. They get picked up for driving under the influence. Some families are close behind that, but most people still come. The other thing about treating substance abuse or alcoholism, and I thought, let me see if, this is, I hate stuff like this, but we probably ought to put it up here. This is number of admissions, referral for treatment, self or other individuals, then, I'm sorry, I was wrong, then the criminal justice system, then other healthcare providers. We're way down here at 5. Then community organizations and alcohol or drug providers provide, the folks that are in the business, the addiction folks. But self or other individuals, and I think that's family. For younger, it's the criminal justice is the most. This is the number of admissions for any intensive care unit. And that was one of the frightening things for me as an intensive care doctor, is to have active alcoholism. And half the people, if we go over to Sibley or down the road to George Washington, half the people in any ICU there are there because of an addiction. Either they smoked too much or drank too much or ate too much. And to have active alcoholism and be the youngest director of the largest intensive care unit in the federal system was enough to frighten me enough to get sober. I'll just put it that way. This was interesting. Heroin and other opiates is next. There's a significant heroin addiction problem in people over 65. Why? Because we've now, I think, overcorrected and are writing too few opiates, and you can get heroin out there and it's cheap and it works. And we kind of, after making Purdue Pharmacy and Big Pharma and JCO made pain the 5th vital sign. You remember that? The etiology of the opiate addiction problem in this country is primarily due to Big Pharma and JCO. Because when I was in the emergency room teaching emergency medicine, if the patient said that they had pain and you didn't give them a pain medicine, specifically an opiate, you got your chart dinged. That was JCO. They came through, they made, how are you in pain today? Remember the 5th vital sign? Yes, ma'am.
What is JCO?
Joint Presentation of Medicare.
Try to say something nice about it. Yes,
Okay.
Joint
Thank you.
Committee, Hospital
Yeah.
Accreditation Committee.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
They're vicious and they're awful, and I can go on, but I've got stories. But it started out with a bunch of surgeons from San Francisco and LA saying, hey, why don't we come down to visit your hospital? You come up and visit ours, and we'll see how we could do it differently. And it became this really oppressive bureaucracy that can take away your ability to get paid. They were going to shut down the National Naval Medical Center because anesthesiologists had, before their cases in the morning, had pulled out their Anectine and left it out on their card. Well, Anectine's bad, and if you give somebody Anectine, they quit breathing and they die. But that is an error that can be corrected with one note. And somebody walking, they were going to cut down the whole medical system because of it. that's the power of it, and I won't get to preaching more about it. But this is an interesting chart here showing the incidence of suicide, which is very closely related. Over half the people that commit suicide have alcohol in their system. This is, can you see which section that is? That's white males. We're the worst. This is black males, which has a little bit of a bump, and black females, of course, are the lowest, and white females. Women tend to kill themselves in the 50s, but as it gets older, men, we don't do well, particularly if we're not married. And the ER visits, this is the number of ER visits. I'll promise to stop with these things. But this is prescription and non-prescription pain reliever, bring them in. Non-narcotic pain relievers, 80%, then benzos, then alcohol in combination with other drugs, antidepressants. It's interesting to me that alcohol's way down here. It's mainly drugs now, and drug complications that get the older population into emergency room. And any of you that have been in primary care or looked at a primary care chart, they get stuck on something, you know, each year, and nobody ever goes through. And we've only got one detox system. It's a cytochrome 450 system that's kind of the mix master that gets rid of all this stuff. It's in the liver, and it's the one that detoxes all the drugs. Some of it we pee out. But nobody ever looks at what we're cramming into the detox machine and what the byproducts are. And that's, I think, why most prescription and non-prescription pain relievers with the other Lipitor and all of the rest of the kind of stuff, the Losartan, the other medicines that treat high blood pressure, all kind of get mixed up, and we all are, by the time we get to be 70, if we've got into the American Medical Show, are on too many medicines by and large. I love this. Wittgenstein was the only man that looked puzzled at his own lectures. For this, I think very highly of him. So, if I look puzzled, I'll defend myself there. I won't go through the numbers. You don't need to know that, I mean, by being in this room, you know that our suicide rate is more and more and more in our country, and particularly in the older populations. 10th leading cause of death overall, more than twice as many suicides in the United States as there were homicides, which was interesting. I didn't know that. I think we're catching up, and Chicago's helping the homicides catch up. But I couldn't get this, I couldn't cut this down, but these three, Erik Erikson is interesting as that little adolescent rebel was. These three, I think the problems that we deal with in maturity are these three, really. The need to form intimate, caring relationships with other people. Success leads to strong relationships, while failure results in loneliness and isolation. I don't know if you've seen that book by George Valiant called Adulthood. Has anybody read that? It's good. And it was hard for me because the thing that he asked these Harvard, you know, it was one of those studies. I just wish the hell I'd thought of it. He goes to Harvard, and he knows he wants to be a psychiatrist. And he knows he's in with the best and brightest of the country. They're all males, and he interviews 100 of them every year while he's at Harvard, and every 5 years after. And that longitudinal study now is out about 70 years. And I think George is still up and about. I saw him at a conference. I saw him at a conference about 4 years ago, and he's still.
He doesn't run the program anymore.
He doesn't. It's passed on. But there's a great line in there. He asked one of the wives of one of these presidents of Colgate Palmolive or whatever. All these guys got successful. Some didn't. And the thing that correlated the best with success was, guess what? Yeah, the capacity to stay married actually is more specific than that. And he asked one of these wives, he said, did you ever think about divorce? She said, divorce never, murder daily. Which is mental health. I mean, that's what we feel. Generativity, need to create and nurture things that will outlast you. I think that's the great thing about recovery, or has been in my life. And my identification is with Alcoholics Anonymous, but that's going to be here after I'm gone. And to be able to contribute, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's the Baptist church or the Jewish League or the Jewish Defense League or you know, whatever it is, it's something that's going to be here when we're gone. And then the need to look back on life and feel a sense of fulfillment. Success at this stage leads to feeling of wisdom, while failure results in regret, bitterness, and despair. And you either become better or bitter, because we all screw up. We all make, at least speaking for me, I made some bad ones. This is, I liked it because he expanded the world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong in the broken places. But those it will not break, it kills. It kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially. Now this is a line from, I'll go back, from a recent paper, and I'll put it up. And anybody that wants these slides, I'll be glad to send. Talking about the loneliness in America. It's astonishing, and it has increased dramatically the more time we do this with one another, look at screens. The kind of loneliness defined by an absence of meaningful relations now plagues nearly half of all Americans. In fact, American loneliness has doubled since 1980. 1 in 5 Americans now report having no one to talk to when going through difficult times. Our isolation is so severe that Surgeon General Murphy declared it a loneliness, a public health crisis. I want to talk about this guy a little bit because he's my personal hero, and he was a senior who had alcoholism, who was mismanaged in about every way you could think of. You recognize him probably, James Forrestal. He was a graduate of Princeton, or he didn't graduate, he was 3 hours short. And he went to Wall Street, he went to Dillon Reed. Very interesting guy. There's 3 books written about him. I've forgotten the last one, but one is The Great Gatsby. That's a fictionalized book about James Forrestal. He was really an interesting guy. Became Secretary of the Navy. This is the aircraft carrier that was named for him. If you had to credit winning World War II, I'd put it with this man. When he was at Dillon Reed in 1929, he made $5 million. 1929. He was an ace at Wall Street. He also was an ace at lending money to Ford and Kaiser. And when the war turned around, he could call these guys and say, hey, you remember when I lent you that money? I need 100 Kaiser ships. I need 100 B-17s. And I want you to do it, and we did it. And that's what really won the war, won all of it. Now this I want to share with you a little bit because it's personal, and it also is what got the Navy in the substance abuse treatment and got us to develop the best, I think, the best substance abuse of any big company, and for good reason, right? Anyway, these planes, this is a ship of the war. It's a USS Forrestal in Tonkin Gulf, launching planes to bomb Hanoi. This is one about ready to launch. He's actually in, this one's going. This is John McCain's plane right there. A Sidewinder missile went off. We don't know which plane it came off of, but that's the result of it, the explosion. Then 5 500-pound bombs went off. We nearly lost the aircraft carrier. An enemy shot had not been fired. But because it was an aviation accident, we screened the crew for alcohol and drugs and opiates, and 35% were positive for heroin, marijuana, and alcohol, and/or alcohol. At that point in time, the United States Navy got fascinated with having sober sailors handle Sidewinder missiles and put them on these planes. This time, we got an order from the Chief of Naval Operations that we want a program with zero tolerance. We don't care how you do it, but get one for us. And we'd heard of this priest up in Guest House named Father Joe Martin. Anybody heard of Father Joe Martin? And we sent a Navy combat film crew up to film a film called Chalk Talk, the first talk. And that's what we had. That's what our treatment program was. And we had some Quonset huts out in Long Beach, California, and some big books of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was our treatment. We had 2 or 3 chiefs that had gotten sober in AA. And that was our sobriety program. Guess what our retention rate was and our recovery rate was? 80%. Guess what it is now that we're making all the notes and we have antabuse and we've got naltrexone and we've got everything else? About 70%, yeah. It's much lower because we didn't have, but we had a couple of advantages. When the Navy talked to me, they didn't ask Dr. Smith, you think you might need treatment? They said, Dr. Smith, get in the truck, you're going to treatment. So we didn't have to ask people, and we didn't have to ask them if they needed AA meetings. Something else happened real interesting out in Long Beach, and I'll tell you this because no one was having any luck with young Marines getting sober. But we were having a recovery rate in young Marines, that's 18 to 22, of about 60%, which was astonishing. Well, what was happening was we were taking them to AA meetings in Southern California, and every actress wannabe and model wannabe is a waitress and is at AA meetings if they've gotten in trouble with alcohol and drugs. And the Marines were going back to the meetings not to stay sober, but what? To find the girls. And anytime you've got, and that's why for young people, it needs to be kind of a scene. If they come into meetings, a bunch of guys my age, sitting around talking about, oh, well, we don't drink anymore. Well, they don't give a damn about that. But if there's a scene of people that are, and that's very powerful for your information in this town. There's a lot of young, bright people that come to the Hill and get into these cocktail parties and fundraisers and get into trouble real quick. And the recovery rate in Washington for young people is astonishing, and for old people, but that's for different reasons.
Are they based on the recovery rate based on longitudinal studies? How long?
We don't know. What we were following until people got out of the Navy, which varied from 5 years to 25 to 30, in my case, 36 years. But we did know that when they screwed up again, we'd give them one more treatment, and then when that failed, usually it'd be out. You didn't have to go to meetings, but we checked urines, and if you wanted to stay in the Navy, you had to go to meetings. You had to get a sponsor, you had to work the steps. Now here we are, yeah. Back. Let me try back here. Do we have, okay, this, the carrier, and I showed that. Anyway, James Forrestal, who we were talking about that the carrier was named for, after the war, went back to Dillon Reed and he stayed there for about 3 weeks, like a lot of other of the people that had been involved. Jesus Angleton, who was with the CIA, and the guys that had been in the war went back to Wall Street. A lot of them had come out of Wall Street, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't sit at a desk after they'd been through. And Forrestal came back as the Secretary of War. His drinking accelerated. He got very paranoid. He became suicidal. On the way to being hospitalized, Truman finally capitulated because he was a poker player with Forrestal down at the Navy, Secretary of Navy's house in Georgetown. They paid every Thursday night. They were good friends. Finally, Truman said, put him in the hospital. They put him in the hospital. and he tried to jump out of the limousine on the way. Now, when he finally got to Bethesda, Truman called down to talk to Captain Raines, who had my job. He was chairman of psychiatry, and he said, "How's my Secretary of War?" And Captain Raines said, "Mr. President, he's safe." He said, "We got him down in the quiet room, and we've got him sedated, and he's doing fine." And Truman said, "Is he down there with those crazy people?" And Raines said, "Yes, sir, he's down on the psych ward." And Truman said, "I don't want my Secretary of War down there with those crazy people. You put him up in the presidential suite." And what happens? Everybody's nodding. Once you start doing this stuff differently, nothing good happens. So he put him right, this isn't working. He put him right up in there where the presidential suite is. And once you do that, everything that can go wrong does. The corpsman Truman said, "You put a corpsman to watch him 24 hours, and he sat by his bedside." The corpsman that he had, that the secretary liked on Sunday night goes AWOL, as enlisted corpsmen will do when they find a girlfriend. And they had a new corpsman in there, and Forrestal said, "Go get me some crackers and milk." And he said, "Well, I can't leave your side, Mr. Secretary." He said, "I'm Secretary of War." He said, "You go get me some crackers." He said, "Yes, sir." And he went out, and I don't know if anybody's old enough, but in the New York Times and the Washington Post, there was a dotted line showing, do you remember that? Somebody remembers that, yeah. A dotted line showing where he hit down here and killed himself. Brilliant guy, just absolutely. He's the one who's responsible. You know, if you go over to across the Key Bridge of that Marine Corps raising the flag at Iwo Jima, he was there. He was the one that made them photograph that. He used the media good, but he was a good guy. He was really a workaholic and the kind of guy that we needed at the time. I like this quote from Cormac McCarthy. I'm not making an advertisement, but we keep wanting there not to be a war. But I love this. It makes no difference what men think of war. War endures. May as well ask men what they think of stone. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. I think that's profound. And I'm just going to go through a couple of successful and unsuccessful complications of alcohol and PTSD. Does anybody recognize Louis B. Puller? Yeah, somebody does. And you know his dad? Chesty Puller was the one, yeah. He got landed, MacArthur when he landed behind the North Korean troops in Incheon, put that battalion of Marines in, and they were supposed to be out in 2 months, and then the Korean winter hit, and it hit really hard, and Chesty Puller was caught up there. This is the most decorated Marine, and in Marine Corps boot camp, at night you sing "Good Night, Chesty," to go to bed. You sing this song, "Good Night, I Hope You Be." This is his son, Louis B. Puller. Louis, and you can see what happened to Louis Puller in Vietnam. Now, Louis Puller was a really interesting guy. He was an example of what happens in every addiction. And this is something that Jung said, and something that I've learned anyway, that hidden in every addiction, substance abuse, particularly in older people, is part of the personality that is unexpressed, that will come out when you get sober. I did not want to be a psychiatrist. I wanted to be a critical care doctor. But when I got sober, this ping thing and I loved ICU. I never spent a bad minute in an ICU. ICU's a way lot easier than what we do as therapists. Somebody quit breathing, you put a tube in them. Their heart quits, you put a pacemaker in it, you defibrillate them, you got an epinephrine, you got atropine, you got 4 or 5 things. Who has a map for what we do when we see a patient? I mean, it's a whole blank screen, and it's much more difficult. I did not want to do it, but that's what I was. I was a psychiatrist. I was a psychoanalyst. Louis Puller was a writer. He was not a Marine. He wrote his book, Fortunate Son. It's from that, I think it's Creedence Clearwater Revival song, I Ain't No Fortunate Son. He went. He didn't have to go, but he went and he got blown up. He also developed severe alcoholism, and when he relapsed, he shot himself with his shotgun. Good guy. And I knew him way well. This is another example of a guy who essentially the same thing happened to that you recognize, I hope. This is Senator Max Cleland, who wrote a book called Strong in the Broken Places, who lights up a room every time he comes into it. I don't know anyone that is more fun to be around than Max. He's funny, he's light, he spoke at my retirement, and Max said that I had told him to believe in something that he could bet his arm and the leg on it. And sure enough, he lost it. So, but he was a delight. He just had a good time. He transformed his horrible experience. He was up there at Quezon. They were trying to get those Marines out of there. He got off a helicopter, saw a hand grenade, and he thought it had come off his belt. And he reached down, and it was a live hand grenade, so he lost his arm. But I don't know anyone that's more fun or more in love with my wife than Max. They have a good time. This, I think, is the problem in our older people that die of substance abuse or don't get sober. It's the only thing that's been shown. Let me see if it's in the next. Yeah. This, I highly recommend this, Death by Loneliness from Real Clear Politics, May in 19. It's a real succinct thing about the peculiar American loneliness. There's one study of all the things that we've done about suicide, nothing has ever made a difference. Robert Lipton, who was my analyst at the Southern California Institute, started the 800 number because he was suicidal. He was an analyst and a training analyst. That has made no difference. None of the lectures in the Pentagon, you know, anytime the Washington Post said veterans are up and the thing, so that we throw $2 million for a program and we hire some outside firm that is put together because they read the criteria. None of the lectures we've ever done about decreasing suicide. One of the interesting facts I did not find out is most suicidal decisions are made in 5 minutes. Did y'all heard that? That was new to me. What keeps us alive is, do you have a family you love who love you? Do you have friends you trust and confide in? Do you have work that matters? Callings that benefit your neighbors? Do you have a worldview that can make sense of suffering and death? And this is the one I think that is the most interesting as we get older. These two articles I highly recommend. What are the changes that have increased the loneliness in this culture? Each of you can put together your own list. This is my list. I got offered a job up in Reno as a, I don't know if you know Operation Cork, but Ray Kroc, who owned, you know Ray Kroc, who owned, yeah, it's one of the, we're going to talk about intervention, but I'll tell the intervention with Ray. We did the intervention with Ray Kroc in the wing of the hospital that he had donated, Scripps Hospital, with his helicopter out on the helipad. And Joan came in to him and said, and the bottom line is, to do an effective intervention, you have to be able to withdraw money, power, or love, or a combination of those. And at any rate, Joe Persh, my teacher and captain, was down there. And Joan came in and said, Ray, if you don't go to treatment for alcoholism, you're in here for DTs for the 5th time this month. if you don't go to treatment, I'm going to divorce you. And Ray said to Joan, Joan, you'll never divorce me. It'll cost you too much. And Joan said, no, I really will. He said, we have $400 million, I think, and I'm going to try to get $200 million. She said, I don't think I'll get all that, but I'm going to try. At which time Ray Kroc said, where's that hospital? After he got sober, he loved recovery, and he funded every medical school a professorship to teach substance abuse, and one of them was, it's called Operation Cork, and I've forgotten how much he got, but you got where they could pay about $100,000 a year for a psychiatrist, which was pretty good. And I nearly went to the University of Nevada in Reno for that. One of the guys there, you know, the gambling in the older population, and they go to the slot machines primarily, and I was criticizing that. I said, God, what a horrible way to spend. And John said something really touching. He said, it gets them out of the house. It gets them around people. So, you know, something that I was highly critical of, maybe it's not so bad. But the electronics, the loss of the humor in this culture, the comedians can't tell jokes anymore. If Freud could not have told Jewish jokes, we wouldn't have the science of psychoanalysis. If you read jokes in their relation to the unconscious, I just think it's horrible that we can't kid one another. And I love Texas jokes and redneck jokes and Jewish jokes. And I mean, particularly in the emergency room, we needed that dark humor. The increase in loneliness, the lack of meaning, and by that I mean when George and I were born, and George, we're probably about the same. I was born, my dad was getting on an LST to go invade Japan, and my mother was 16, and I think it was probably the night he left. I don't know the details, but we grew up with a meta-narrative, and that was we were going to do. My dad knew when he was coming home. He was going to come home when they got to Tokyo. And the guys that were flying over Germany knew when they were coming home. They were going to come home when Hitler was dead or surrendered. The guys that are going to these wars now of nation building, whatever the hell that is, or as I said, do you really think that Libya's better now that Gaddafi's gone? I met Gaddafi, was with him in the desert. He's the worst guy I've ever been in a tent with. But there wasn't any Al-Qaeda problem in Libya. It was a fairly safe place. You could go to the post office and not get killed. The same with Hussein. Do you really think it's going to be better if we take Assad out? This is off the subject, but this is what I'm saying, that we learn nothing from our experience on that. The lack of meaning, I think, in the meta-narrative now, the political correctness. It's interesting to me that the testosterone in the millennials is half of what it is in my age group. And I could go off on another hour on what I think that's about.
What is that?
Yeah.
Would you say more about that?
Well, I think that guys like to shoot one another and go to war and fight, and there's a taboo about that. There's also some evidence that the plastic that we use for water absorbs, the molecules absorb it when it goes through the gut. I don't know the dynamics. So this is, my daughter's at NYU, and she's a sophomore in medical school, and she knows everything, and she's the one that told me this. And there's good data supporting it. We won't go through this, but briefly, the PTSD is a loss of authority over mental function, but this happens in age too. Persistent mobilization of the body and mind for lethal danger. We do begin to listen. I had a bypass 20 years ago, and every time I'm on the treadmill and I get that thing, I wonder, well, this is it, you know. And that, I don't think you can avoid that. I think what we can do is make sure I have a really good Sunday today. That's the defense against it, because I don't have that many Sundays left. Persistent activation of combat survival skills, and civilian life, persistent expectation of betrayal and exploitation. I think we can get over that. A destruction of it. And I love this guy here. The world's a fine place and worth fighting for, and I hate very much to leave it. And at the same time, after I was at the Mayo Clinic, and it was not too long after I was there that we had started him on Aldomet. You remember the early medicines for blood pressure were terrible and they made you depressed, and Aldomet was one of them. And he killed himself with a shotgun. It was probably his alcoholism that killed him rather than the Aldomet. But we always felt that that was certainly part of it, and that certainly spurred the search for antihypertensive medication that didn't make you so depressed, and we've done really well with that. So what is treatment of substance abuse, whether you're 18 or you're 80? I like the 12 steps. I'm going to make a little advertisement for them. And I do think some medication can be helped. There's no evidence that antidepressants help a lot, but that's another time. And psychotherapy. Psychotherapy, I think, with older people, to get them to tell a story, you know, that's all we really do as analysts, is we tell stories. We try to create meaning by telling stories. We witness the suffering. We acknowledge that it exists. We empower them to get through it. And luckily, if we have some time, get them to cherish it. To cherish that moment in Afghanistan when you got shot at and they missed you. There's nothing more thrilling than that, to be shot at and missed. And you've really gone out there, and it's a good thing. There's a certain amount, I think, in therapy with older people when they get sober that is grief work. And if you could characterize my drinking, and I think the drinking of most people who are older, it's kind of a form of returning to breastfeeding into the coffin. I don't like this, glug, 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 I ate, glug, 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 my such and such didn't call me, glug, 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 the Democrats are doing this, or the Republicans are doing this, or I watch Fox, or I watch CNN, or glug, glug, glug. It's that avoiding and that isolation and that recreating a womb around you so you don't have to deal with real life. Because life hurts. We get out and we bump around one another. We bump into one another. I think that one of the things that helps older people, and if you can get them to do it, there are so many good retreats around here. I go to one up in Michigan, and it's at a Sacred Heart retreat place, and I'm an agnostic Buddhist Jew who loves Christ. I mean, I'm not advertising anything, but I think there's a value in just kind of going up there. It's $150, you get a meal, you get your own room, which is important to me. And there's so many retreats, particularly in this area. The Catholic University does a lot. And there's a lot around here that are really valuable, and certainly less than a session with me, and with most of you too. Psychotherapy, and I think the fourth is the recovery of the lost self. To succeed in this culture, in a culture that's technologically as advanced as this, you have to repress part of yourself in some way. Everybody in this room has something that they kind of wanted to do that they pushed aside so you could get in this room, usually. You know, when I was in private practice in Newport Beach, it was rare that a mother didn't, usually 36, 38-year-old beautiful blonde mother that had about $20,000 worth of plastic surgery, that brought her 18-year-old boy in because she was not going to fix his Porsche one more time. And he has had 2 years of college, and he's got 6 hours of home and family living, and B's in that. And he knows how to surf and smoke dope and hang tin and screw around. That's what I wanted to do when I was at the Naval Academy. We used to march off to the games, and the St. John's College guys would throw stuff at us, baby killers and everything. And it killed me because I wanted to be at St. John's smoking dope and playing croquet. You have to go back and find that lost self. The way I did it is to become a shrink. This is as close to as I can come to being a hippie and wearing a uniform, is to talk about this stuff. All of us have something that we wanted to do that we repressed. And in a way, recovery and putting away the alcohol or the Zoloft or whatever it is that's kind of repressing that, you kind of have to find a way out. Journaling, as most of you know, is a great way to do that. And I think therapy's real good. Therapy and dreams. Jung was better with dreams than I am. So another action that can be taken is spiritual seeking. I'm going to get back to that. Writing, physical recovery of the lost self. The discovery of emotions, I think, and I think this is a responsibility. Joy is a form of wisdom. It really is. And if you haven't learned to feel joyful, it's your fault. It's our fault. Nobody owed us any of this. The gratitude just for today, I mean, a beautiful day. We got the fall coming. We've got, what for me is the high point of the year is college football season. For me to have a good weekend, 4 teams have to win. That never happens. So I'm sad this morning, but each of you have something that you invest in, whether it's a symphony season or the opera season or a book club, to get back out in there and express the gratitude. This is the paper that I just read, getting ready for this, but they had people write a letter of gratitude and did MRIs and look at the rostral anterior cingulate cortex, and it's bigger 3 months after the letter's written, which was astonishing. But accessing that emotion of gratitude, you can't do it drinking. You really can't. You can have these moments of, oh, it's fun, you know, at the track or something, but really deep gratitude for just being here at all. Awe and wonder, these emotions, really, if you can't access those, you drink again. There's, I got a little book, Heidegger, that's a synopsis of Heidegger being in time, and they said if you did a synopsis of it at all, it would be wow. Just being here, that anything exists. If that doesn't kind of just boggle your mind, you know, that the sun comes up, that the leaves turn in the fall. Those kind of emotions and accessing them make us look forward to the next fall. They really do. But a week before the Kentucky Derby, I can hardly contain myself. And now they've got the Breeders' Cup. It's the first weekend in November. There may be a more expensive hobby, I just hadn't found it. Oh, these are the talk about to the Navy War College and Army War College, which half of them really come alive and half of them kind of just stay puzzled. All gratitude, humor, joy, play. Play is you know, those of you that have read Winnicott, and they really got it. We know in this culture, most of us know how to work. That's the way you get to DC. This is the most workaholic damn town in the world. The Pentagon the average guy at the Pentagon spends 16 hours days. The Hill's almost as bad. I was the psychiatrist for the Hill. And you can see what a good job I did down there. I love this guy. Risked putting his picture up in the Freudian Institute. In 30 years, I've treated many patients. Among all patients in the second half of life, every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which the living religions of every age have given the followers, and none was really healed who did not regain his religious outlook. And Jung had some conflicts around this, as you probably know. He had 8 uncles, and his father were Calvinist ministers who are not a lot of fun to grow up with.
Who is it?
Carl Jung, yeah. This I love. Religion is the human response to being alive and having to die. And that's the paradox that I think we saw, certainly at my age. I'm interested in it. This is for the Army War College. The general principle that this is what Freud said about why we keep going to war. Conflicts of interest between men are settled by use of violence. This is true of the whole animal kingdom, from which men have no business to exclude themselves. And this is, I think, if you summarize, and I think you people are bright people, and I'll share it with you whether you're interested in it or not. The moderation that we're trying to do in the Middle East is what's getting us into trouble. Lord Macaulay said it, the essence of war is violence, and moderation is war. In war, it's imbecility. To think that you can drive 2 tanks in a village and piss them off less than 20 tanks is just the height of absurdity. We get in these wars and try to do nation building, and they're political things, and they're just almost always, we haven't won one of them. Have not won one of them. And Margot and I were talking earlier about these. Those of you that are interested in PTSD, because these guys, these Vietnam guys, are now drinking too much, and now are the guys that were coming from Gulf War I. The Odyssey, this is in America. Jonathan Shea is just absolutely the clearest of all, I think. There's nothing new about it. And again, I said the meta-narrative that we have now, I don't know what it is. I don't know where the enemy is. I think 9/11 kind of showed that you can't have a war on an idea, really, of terrorism that's very successful. They need to have their civil war, and we keep getting in the middle of it. We need to get out, by my value system, we need to get out of the Middle East. Let them do whatever they're going to do. That's their call. They build an atomic bomb. We've got bombs that'll take that out. And this is from All Quiet on the Western Front. And these kids that are coming back with anger against the whole world, living here, cocksure with their knickknacks as though the monstrous years had never been. The one thing mattered, life and death, and beyond that, nothing. And the buddies I had that were in Vietnam, and certainly the times I've been exposed, they said, every day I was in Vietnam, I was thinking about home, and every day I got back home, I was thinking about Vietnam. These are just a couple of films I want to. This is a terrific film, got it nominated for Academy Award. Not many people saw it, but it showed how our military thinking now is most bizarre to me. And I love this about millennials, and it's probably, I'm at that age where I say the youth are gone to hell. But today's sub-40s have different horrors, prominent among which are anomie and solipsism and a peculiarly American loneliness. The prospect of dying without once having loved something more than yourself. And I think that there's more truth to that than not right now. We're lying to these kids. We're raising them, and we've got safe places, and we teach them that you have a right to not be offended, that you grow up and you're not going to be offended. Well, that's not the way it is out here. I get offended every day. I kind of like it. But you have to, we just raise them up with these soft things, and then they get into old age, and then they have to come back to reality, I think. Great picture about PTSD and recovery. Did anybody see that? Absolutely terrific. What happens to Chris is learns that the only way out of any trauma is helping others, love and service. It doesn't go much beyond that. You know, all we've got is each other. And what PTSD does is, and the way out is exactly what happened to him, and he got shot by a person he was helping. This is, how am I doing for time? Is you about ready to quit?
15 minutes left.
15 minutes left. This is the absurdity of our war now. I just want to share this with you. There's nothing that increases erotic drive as much as the prospect of getting killed. The current Pentagon is a little lost here. I just love this film. Everybody's seen this film, but it doesn't get any better than that, does it? When Inga, this is the Comfort, the USS Comfort. It's a hospital ship. We've got 14 operating rooms on there that can do operating theater, and we can do major trauma. We put it out for the first Gulf War and floated it around the Arabian Sea waiting for the casualties, and we didn't get many because most of the Iraqis surrendered immediately, and the ones that were hurt in the field and not transferable. But basically, we had a hospital ship manned by nurses and corps waves and corpsmen and physicians, and the average age on the ship, I think, was 23. And they didn't have anything to do for 6 months. And guess what? It was 18% of the women came back pregnant. And the Navy says, oh, no, they have orders not to do that. Well, how naive can you do that? These boats here were some of the favorite places. But when you threaten people with death, what happens? Eros goes up. I presented a little paper after I did my fellowship in critical care medicine at USC, because my own personal experience, and I noticed others, that when the death rate in the ICU goes up, the sexual behavior in the staff goes up. That's the way the earth replenishes itself. The Pentagon does not yet know this. They said that you just write a regulation, they won't do it. Why do we have increased PTSD? I think we went over this. Nation building, paralyzed force, that line from T.S. Eliot. And I have had another one of those little films to show about some of the bad guys drive a Mercedes van out, take out a rocket propelled gun. I don't know if any of you have seen it on YouTube, but if you Google it, you can get it. They take out a rocket propelled grenade launcher, put it in the weeds, come back to the van, and these guys got them in sight, and they said, you know, permission to smoke them is what the term is. And they said, well, did they have it in their hands? And said, yes, sir. Well, was it a weapon war? Yes, sir, it was a rocket. Well, they don't have it now. No, and it goes back and forth 12 times. And finally they say, well, if they go back from the van and pick it up again, then you can smoke them. But it's the kind of absurdity that they're in now, where if you're gonna go to war, you have to go ahead, and when you see that, not have to explain to somebody back in Washington what your thinking processes were. And that's why these kids are coming back so wounded and disappointed and fragile, and it don't mean nothing. The guy that won the Medal of Honor up in Afghanistan, that took his Jeep back in the fire zone, they were up there with a sniper team. I don't know if those of you that saw, what was the name of the film about the corpsman, the single corpsman that gets out? That Ed, Anita, do you remember Ed's son?
Lone Survivor?
Lone Survivor, yeah. These guys were up there, and they make a decision not to kill the shepherd boys, which is a very ethical decision. But in making that decision, he wipes out a helicopter thing. And I'm not arguing now to shoot shepherd boys. What I am arguing is if you're gonna go up there, you have to be willing to do that. And we don't have the value system intact that requires that. And what Khattab said, that wrote In the Shade of the Quran, that was the Bible for the Al-Qaeda, is Western culture has lost the willingness and the ruthlessness to continue its way of life. And in my sense, that's what happened, at least in combat. This is Odysseus. Looked at Odysseus at first. She didn't recognize him. She thought he was a beggar in rags. You know who did recognize Odysseus when he comes back? His dog, the dog. And I think the nursemaid, but I'm not sure. But his dog recognized him. I love this. This is the invasion of Iraq, documents put up on the wall by General Mahdi. To the people of Baghdad, we come here not as conquerors, but as liberators, to free you from generations of tyranny. Does anybody recognize that? Recently. Our armies do not come to your cities as lions that conquerors or enemies, but as liberators. Your worth has been stripped of you by unjust men. The people of Baghdad shall flourish under institutions which are consonant with their sacred laws. That was Maud again. Nothing. Do we not learn anything? Is this really a continued policy of attention deficit disorder in foreign policy? Balfour Accords, if the British Army leaves Iraq, there will be civil war. And British military intelligence in Baghdad told London that foreign fighters were crossing the borders from Syria. This is in 1920, which of course was controlled by the French. It's like a fingerprint identification. It's the same thing. Our psychotherapy again is to witness the suffering of life, to allow the story to be told, to express, if you can, help them express and access the gratitude for being here at all. Because a lot of good stuff happens so they don't get to your office. And if we can't access that, we can't feel good about living, and then empower with the strength, look, you got this far, God, let's have a good time now. The only mistake you and I can make today is to not have a good afternoon. That's the tragic mistake. And our vets are painfully aware of the absence of intimacy, tenderness, light, playfulness, easy mutuality in their sex life. You have to learn to make love again. And these are great films about secondary trauma, which we get from dealing with trauma. This is probably the best one. It's called Behind the Lines with Jonathan Price. I can't recommend it enough. When I got the teaching award out at Bethesda, I say that for a couple reasons. I want you to know I got it. But the other one, I want you to know the reason I got it is we watch movies. This is one of them. This is acceptance, and I just took this from the Odyssey. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Yeah, that's probably the most famous thing from that. And I won't go into closer. These are 3 films by Kieslowski about what happens when you've seen them. They're tremendous because each one of these experiences a major trauma in their life, a loss of a loved one, or a loss of a career, or a loss of a country. Then what do you do when everything's bad? I can't recommend these enough. And he died, unfortunately, after he made these, but boy, they're great films. I highly recommend this article, and Jim Rendon in March in the New York Times, post-traumatic stress, surprisingly positive flip side. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't want cognitive behavior to get over it. I don't want any Zoloft. I want my hypervigilance. And I want my gratitude for being alive. God, I want to make each day a little better.